Hello everyone, thank you for joining us on our first episode of Morning Talks, where we get you the insights that set you right. So I'm Philip. I'm the head of international business here at Morning, and I'm joined by two guests from Glory Global Solutions. We have Ben, the managing director of Glory Global Solutions, and we have Sue, the international business and product manager of Glory Global Solutions. How are you guys today?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Thanks, Philip.
Good, thank you.
So you guys have been in Indonesia for about a week now. Just want to ask, how have we been treating you, and how's it been?
Yeah, pretty good. It is the first time I've been to being in Indonesia, and everything is good. The people I met so far are so nice, and the weather is good. Not quite hot.
Not too hot?
Yeah, and the traffic is always busy.
Yeah,
from day
traffic.
to night. But it also helped me made me believe that the economy is growing here,
yeah.
because all the people here is hardworking. Yeah. And the most impressed part is I haven't been used the cash for a long time. Even I'm from the company, we made the cash handling machine, but I have been here, and there are so many occasions that ask me to use the cash only.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the cash is pretty used in Indonesia.
Oh yeah, most definitely, yeah. Traditional methods of payments are still widely used in Indonesia.
Yeah, so have the good chance to see so many banks, how the banks lay out and how the bank is designed in Indonesia. Yeah.
The operations, the branches.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How about you, Ben?
So not my first time in Indonesia, not my first time in Jakarta, but as always, amazing hospitality, very friendly people, being looked after incredibly well. We've had a really interesting week. We've had so many meetings with customers, prospects here, bringing Sue in to meet lots of different banks and listen to some of the challenges they have. We started off the week with a really engaging session with the PT Murni product management, sales, business development team, listening to some of their challenges and their concerns and how we work together. So it's really built from there.
Awesome.
The traffic is always a challenge, but it actually hasn't stopped us from getting on with what we need to do. And it's just one of those things, right? In terms of the options that we now have around getting around, but the meetings have been great. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more, but so many different insights and comparisons with other countries in the region, parts of the world, but also so much innovation that's happening in Indonesia too, which is really exciting to see.
Definitely. Maybe a little bit about the culinary, because in Indonesia, whenever we have guests that come here, they always mention about how diverse our culinary is, how spicy the food is. Have you guys have any similar experiences when it comes to culinary experiences?
Not really.
So we've had great food.
Yeah.
So we've had absolutely amazing food, always. I think we've had half a dozen different types of tofu, different satay, about 5 different types of nasi goreng.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we're going to be taking some packets of various bits and pieces back. You have to go and search really, really hard to have a bad meal in Indonesia. So no, I always love coming here, and we always get looked after very, very well. So Sue will no doubt be going back with some Indonesian treats in her suitcase as well.
Awesome.
Yeah,
so,
I love the food here very well. It is also the first time I have the Indonesian food here, because I never find an Indonesian restaurant in Japan. Yeah, so but I found it very, very delicious.
Very delicious.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. So as Ben previously mentioned, for the past couple of days, you guys have been visiting and getting to know some of our major banks in Indonesia. Maybe the branches, the operations, and of course, our unique customers. So with decades of experience in the field as the managing director and as the international business and product manager, can you guys mention on some of the countries that you've been in when it comes to these major banks?
So countries from around the world.
Yes,
well, Sue's traveled incredibly extensively. So we were just talking a little bit before about Canada, but Sue, why don't you give a rundown of some of the countries that you have been working with, and then we'll talk a little bit about Asia.
I have been the Euro countries, and I have been to Italy.
Italy, amazing.
Also I have been to Mexico as well. So the branch I would say the branch looks quite modern now. I'm not sure how it was like before, because when I went there, the branch designed in the modern style. Yes, that's quite, So you can't see any cash transaction in the teller counters. Okay. Yes, so pretty much they focus on engage with the customer, and for the cash transaction, they just address the cash transaction on the ATM and in-branch tellers automation machine. Yes,
So we will be touching on that a little bit later, but it's mostly the branches, when it comes to transactions, it's mostly automated, but when it comes to interaction, then it is person to person. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
How about you, Ben?
So I think what's been really interesting this week, when we've been talking to a lot of the Indonesian clients, that Sue's been giving examples from around the world where we've been talking about banks in Canada and the US, but also in Paraguay and Colombia. We've been talking about banks in Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, and also Japan. So we've had all these different examples of what banks are doing. And what's very interesting is the world continues to get smaller. Definitely. At the same time, the population is growing. And you're finding that there's a lot of similarity in what banks are doing, but then there's also quite a lot of diversity in how they're approaching their solutions. So we recognize that no two banks are the same. Even when you're dealing with a multinational bank that has offices and presence in multiple countries, they're still acting locally. They're still addressing the local concerns because they need to put their customer at the heart of everything they're doing. But then they're also finding different levels of innovation. And so that's been really interesting this week, that we can show a picture from two banks merging in Paraguay, a digital bank and a physical bank coming together to create a new operating system. And that can resonate with a bank in Indonesia that's going through similar, but not the same changes. And they're wanting to know more. And I think that's been really useful with Sue being here and bringing that international perspective. So I've been able to talk to them about some of the projects that we've been doing here in Indonesia with the Murni team, of course, but then also talking about, what's happening in Malaysia, what are we seeing in Thailand, what's the latest trends in Hong Kong, what are Indian banks doing? And all the time there's been this great willingness from the Indonesian banks to share their insights and talk about the similar challenges they have, but also then the unique challenges that they have.
One specific to the Indonesian.
Specific to Indonesia. Awesome. And that's a great learning for us, because that's giving us the insight to be able to then feed that back into some of the solutions that we're developing and trying to then to think about, well, maybe that solution from Paraguay can fit in Bogor. Not that you ever hear Paraguay and Bogor in the same sentence. But this is where I think we're able to take the global and the local and then bring them in a kind of a infinity loop together.
Awesome. Wow. So you can see a lot of innovation when it comes to these types of countries. Like you would never put these two types of countries in the same sentence, but when it comes to innovation, you never know, right?
Yeah, you never know. And I think what we found out this week is that a lot of the banks have similar challenges. That we're in a post-COVID recovery period, but we're still dealing with some of the long-term effects and the consequences of COVID.
Most definitely.
We're dealing with a gig economy where people are perhaps moving away from traditional roles and they're opting to freelance or take different types of work. We're dealing in many cases with a shortage of labor, where people are saying, no, I don't want to do that job. I want to be able to control my working hours. We're dealing with staff who are looking to optimize how they work when they work. So quality of life is becoming really important. I think COVID made a lot of people realize life is short and I want to really get the most out of my experience. And that in itself is changing the way in which companies, not just banks, but everyone, how people are hiring, and then also how they're retaining. So we've heard some great insights from banks saying, look, customer service is incredibly important. We have experiential teams, we have development teams, but we're also realizing that the only way we're going to deliver great customer service is from our people. So we have to have great systems, but people behind our systems, whether that's in delivering great IT, but also frontline experience. But then we also have to look after our people. Because if we don't do that, then your first transaction could be your last transaction, or your first interaction is your last interaction. And so that's where we're seeing this big drive towards automation.
Yeah.
But with a human face is becoming incredibly important.
Awesome. So you're saying that when it comes to first impressions, that really makes a big impact?
Well, I think first impressions always count.
Yeah.
And so you've got to make sure that you're delivering on the brand promise. And so why have I gone to this particular institution?
Yeah.
Well, I've gone there because of all their marketing and maybe previous experience. But that first impression is important, but it's then being able to consistently deliver on that.
Oh, okay.
So we were talking with a bank this week and they were saying, yes, it's really important that our app works and our digital banking is consistent, but then that experience needs to be delivered also in our ATMs and in our branches. And if we're not aligned, if we're inconsistent in that delivery, then people get very mixed messages and they struggle to think about, well, what should I be taking away? And there's a huge amount of competition right now for the customer wallet, whether you're a corporate, whether you're an SME, or whether you're an individual consumer. There's more and more competition out there. So how you retain your customers is getting harder and harder. But I do think that people value those insights and they value that ability to interact with people, whether that's through a call center, in a branch, in a store. I mean, during the pandemic, so much went online.
Yeah.
It was that big acceleration of online shopping, food delivery, the appification of everything.
Yeah.
But how many malls in Jakarta have closed down since then? There are malls opening, there are shops that are out there, people were back consuming.
Yeah.
Sure, they're shopping online for some things and they're price checking when they're in the shop, but they're still using the physical store in retail and in banking because they're areas that they trust. I go into a shop and I know what I'm buying because I'm worried about that thing that I ordered online. Is it going to be delivered? Is it what I ordered? And so there's always that element of trust. And one of the banks said to us this week that they look at their branches as a necessary evil. Ideally they're expensive, they're difficult to manage, but they said we still need them because they're also trust centers. It's where people come for advice, engagement, and for the bank. They said, and it's also great for us because we deliver on our brand promise in those stores, transaction by transaction, interaction by interaction. Now they're doing it differently. Yeah. But that's giving them great opportunities to reinforce the customer loyalty as well as the staff engagement. So it's been really interesting. And in that sense, similar to a lot of other countries around the region and around the world. But like I said, the innovation that we're seeing in Indonesia is not just theoretical, like in the lab. We're seeing it out in the stores, and we're hearing the change committees and the branch operations people talk about wanting to take it again to the next level, which is very encouraging.
How about you, Sue? When it comes to you're the international business and product manager. Yeah. Especially, how Ben talked about COVID and how it greatly affected the banking industry. What are your takes on that?
Yeah. Yes. I think Ben explained a lot. So the situation is the same and the trends are the same. We have seen same trends in all around the world in other countries as well. So it changed the consumers' preference. They prefer online banking. They prefer to do some cash transaction, not in person, because especially during the COVID, the people don't want to contact with any other person, so they really want to use some ATM or use some cashless the payment channel or something like that. But also when we come back to branch, why banks still need branches? So I think branch is a place that providing an engagement places for the bank, and is somewhere the bank can generate profit for the bank. Because for me, if I want to discuss loan or some huge investment in my life, I don't want to just do that online.
Yes, most definitely.
And I want to go to with a branch and talk to the bank staff to discuss that. So that's why I think having a branch is still a very important factor for a consumer to select a bank. And but the young generation, they probably will prefer the digital payment as well.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so, we talked a lot about the global aspect, and also we touched a lot on the branches and how, a lot of people, while they do like online transactions, they look to branches for the human interactions, especially like you mentioned, like when it comes to a long and a large, big investment, you kind of want to talk to someone one-on-one to make sure that they understand 100% how you feel and how you want to move forward with that. So something I want to ask the both of you as experts are, what are some major trends in branch automation and digital transformation that is currently shaping the Indonesian banking and financial industry?
So I think the use of apps, mobile banking, clearly, and that's consistent around the world. That's probably the number one change. Yeah. And it's not uncommon for banks to be talking about wanting to get over 99% of transactions now automated and into a digital space. I guess there's a recognition that one of the challenges is that still means, first of all, you have to get people registered for a bank account and then banking in a digital and a mobile fashion. So we can't exclude those people from the conversations. You need to make sure that we're still providing the space for them to bank and reaching to the currently unbanked or underbanked. But beyond the app, there's also a recognition, and Sue was talking about this in terms of what's happened since COVID, is that I'm not aware of any banks in the world, and certainly not Indonesia, that have shut all their branches. So there's been a change, and what we're seeing is that the number of branches around the world are declining. But in some countries, as branches close, others are opening. So we're relocating branches. They're moving. And the same is happening in retail. They're moving in different areas. And Indonesia is a really great example where you're having a lot of demographic growth. Yeah. You're having a lot of economic growth. So where either new suburbs, new towns are opening, new dwellings, new areas, so bringing finance into the community, and that kind of branch format, that change is taking place as well. So long gone are the ideas of in fact, in the conversation this week, no one's really talked about a traditional branch anymore. It's definitely moved on. That the digital transformation is saying center of trust, area of advice, an area of connection, consistency of our delivery, and how are we going to then use technology to make that happen? And part of that is recognizing that we can automate a huge amount. Yeah. So the self-service area continues to grow, as in devices. So typically ATMs, cash deposit machines, check machines, these kind of things are standard for standard, normal, typical, mundane, low profit, necessary transactions. But then within the branch and the bank network itself, there's still an area of, we want to have high contact with our customers, whether that's prestige customers, high net worth customers, or simply where we're, as you've just been talking about, where you're making complex financial decisions. And you want advice, you want to look at someone and make sure you're comparing what you're about. And often because it's regulatory, it can be that you need to have that regulatory sign off that it's a wet signature in a branch. But in between the two areas, you're seeing still some areas where the banks are saying, on our digital journey, we can't digitize those transactions, but they're very dull, mundane, boring. Maybe they're more corporate in terms of large amounts of funds being managed, cash in, cash out, or they're more complicated. And we want to be able to find a way to make that happen smoother, to allow our staff to give advice. And if you like, do more of the selling and the support and problem solving, that counting money, processing money is simply not part of that area. So we're seeing this change in technology where we're saying we've gone as far as we can with a lot of self-service. And now it's the time, and this is where we're seeing a lot of the innovation. To say, let's look at how we can adapt what we know. Let's take inputs from the experts in the branch themselves. Let's bring in the IT from within the bank itself. Let's look at our operations people, and how can we then craft a solution that is perhaps unique to our operating environment, and then be willing to experiment and test with that to say, this is going to work for us, or we modify it and keep that iterative version of experimentation. Like, we're going to test it this way, we're going to look at it in a different way. And that's where we're at right now. We're seeing a number of banks experimenting. but experimenting well. And some of the results are being really solid, and some of them are still okay. Well, are we focusing on personal? Do we need to be more corporate? But what are we going to do, and how can we then facilitate the technology to work with that?
Awesome. And do you see customer behavior being a really big factor when it comes to?
Yeah, I mean, customer behavior is incredibly important, because if you're not delivering to their needs, to the customer's needs, then they will find another way of transacting. Yeah. And maybe that won't be with you. So in talking to some of the banks this week, it's been very interesting about the idea that we potentially take our services to them and putting our technology into a retail location itself. And that could be to take all the money that's being brought in and out of a store, whether it's a bakery or a department store or a transportation location, and just managing that in the retail location itself, providing a service with a cash management company to come and collect it and process it. So the branch is now out of that loop. And so there's that customer experience is very important. That also then impacts the bank branch itself and saying, well, how are we going to help people with their transactions? So one of the banks was talking to us about their idea around concierge service, very much aligned with the idea of checking in at an airport. You now have more devices where you're doing self-check-in or retail self-checkout, but someone to oversee that in a concierge support facility to help either guide you through the transaction, or very much then about maybe that transaction can't be completed. How many times have you been at an airport where you're trying to check in and the system doesn't quite work, or maybe there's a problem with your bag, or a problem with your ticket, and then what they're doing is they're taking you over to a desk that can help you. So it's what we call a warm handover, because you don't want someone saying, okay, I have a problem doing an ATM transaction and it says go and see the teller. Well, if the teller's got a queue, and then I just give up. Or I get very uncomfortable and I go and join the teller line, and that's just not great. So the idea is to try and blend the automation with a real customer service opportunity. And that means you've got to invest in it. You've got to have the right people. So if your people in your branches are not people, then you're,
it's kind of hard.
It's kind of hard. If you put all the emphasis on a bank branch as being security and everyone is intimidated, that's also not going to work particularly well. So, but branches is where the money is. And so you have an element of security plus then support and making sure that you can deliver through on all those different aspects.
How about you, Sue? Do you have any, what are your thoughts on the major trends in branch automation, if you could give your take?
Yes, especially after the pandemic, the pandemic accelerated the digital transformation. So most of the bank could have new technology on mobile banking, online bankings. Also, the young generation, they prefer to use that kind of payment method or online banking. So this kind of trends will have some impact on the bank branches building, because if there is no consumer visiting the branch, then the bank it doesn't make sense for the bank to run a branch, because running a branch means so many costs, CIT costs, hiring costs, and education costs, because they have to education the tellers when hiring new tellers. Also, so there's so many costs behind running a branch. So now the chance we have seen around the world is the bank still want to have a branch, because they want to provide a place to engage with the customer, to provide some financial service to the customer, to generate the profit. But we have seen so many banks, they closing the branch, but because branch is still so important, so they kind of just try to relocate the branch, because like we have some case study in Italy, and because some urban area there's no branches at all, So that became a serious social problem because the consumer have nowhere to do any cash transaction, to withdraw money or deposit money. Yeah. So the trend we have seen is some bank is going to relocate the branch. So probably here 2 branch and here probably just this area a big branch, or just a branch with tellerless branch, but with some kind of automatic cash transaction machines, like self-service machine or ATM, or they just use the TCR machine to adjust as much as the cash transaction to those kind of machine. And then those branches are used as a place to provide the customer service. Yeah, so they are trying to shift the branch to a customer service center rather than transaction hubs.
Awesome. Okay, so touching on, maybe I want to touch again more on your international prowess when it comes to banks that, when it comes to trends. Sometimes some corporate companies, they either follow trend or they don't. Can you guys maybe share some examples that banks that have successfully implemented these branch automation initiatives? Maybe start with Suni.
Okay, so just I mentioned so many times, Italy, we have a bank customer. Yeah. So their challenge is the teller have to spend a whole days on cash transaction, because all the customer, when they need to do some kind of cash transaction like withdraw money, deposit money, or bill payment, they have to go to the tellers. So teller just spend the whole days doing this kind of cash transaction. The reason why they're not using the ATM is because the ATM have some limitation. They can withdraw a large amount of cash, or also they cannot do bill payment. So also if they want to like withdraw all denomination cash, they have to go to the teller. So even they have ATM, they still have to, there is still so many cash transaction or financial service, they have to ask for the tellers to do it for them. So the bank's challenge is they run a branch, but the teller have no time to sell any financial product. So they can't generate profit for the bank because doing this kind of cash transaction for the consumer doesn't generate any profit for the bank. So they come to us, and we have proposed them with our TCR machine, and also with our coin recycler machine, because bill payment, they have to do bill payment. They need to withdraw the both notes and coins. So on ATM, if they use ATM, the ATM doesn't support the coins. So that's the problem. So what we have done is we combine the coins and notes recyclers, and then also combine a check deposit unit, machine, QR codes, and document, A4 document printer or something like that. So to meet the requirements of the bank, because we have looked what kind of transaction the tellers have to handle every day. So in order to adjust more than 90% of those cash transaction to a machine, we combine a new Unix solution for the bank. And then after they deploy this solution, the teller say they have saved more than 80% of their time.
Amazing.
Yeah, because after deploying the solution, the consumer just go to the machine to do the cash transaction, do the bill payment by themselves. So also they could do the check deposit by themselves. So they don't even need to go to the tellers. So that for the customer, the benefit is they don't have to wait for a long time. They reduce the waiting time in the branch, and they feel more relaxed because just doing simple cash transaction, they don't have to ask the tellers for support. But for Of course, for the old generation, they have some problems using the machine. Mm-hmm. But in that case, they could call out a teller. Mm-hmm. So we also provide a menu that call a teller for assistance. Yeah. So they could call the tellers anytime, because those solution is just different from the ATM. Mm-hmm. It is installed inside the branch, mm-hmm. where the teller is always available. Mm-hmm. So that whenever someone call out a teller, the teller will come out from the counter to assist the use of the machine. So for the bank, the benefits very outstanding, because a teller could reduce to save more time to engage with the customer. So they could sell more financial products to the customers, and they feel less stressed, because in some country, if there's some mistake on a cash transaction, the teller have to pay for that. Yes. So they feel less stressed after deploying that solution. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, maybe for Ben, Sue touched a little bit on how Glory has contributed to this branch automation and digital transformation. Maybe you can emphasize a little bit more on that, the importance of Glory in this whole process.
So we've been the leader in branch automation for, I'm guessing, over 20, maybe 30 years in terms of what we've been doing. And we have had many, many generations of solutions that have been used to automate transactions, cash transactions in branches. Through acquisition, we can point back to really being the inventor of the ATM. Mm-hmm. So that was originally invented by De La Rue back in the 1960s, but then Glory has acquired the company that did that. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of pedigree and history in understanding cash transactions. We've continued to do this around the world. Independent research shows that we supply more of these solutions than any other supplier or all other suppliers put together.
Wow.
So we're the number one, and that's not just our numbers. That's from people like RBR Datos, who prove that on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. We work in so many countries around the world. So whether it's Paraguay, Colombia, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, China, Hong Kong, Middle East, North Africa, every country in Europe, and so on, and obviously massively in the USA. So we have that experience that allows us to bring local insights into the global picture. We have a family of agile, flexible software solutions that allow these devices to be integrated into branch systems. Mm-hmm. We work with local partners like PT Murni here in Indonesia to make sure that is then further adapted to the local environment. And here in Indonesia, we have a list of customers that any organization would be incredibly proud of, simply because of the way in which they've taken the solutions and adapted them and used them. And not just in the last 1 or 2 years, but over the last decade. Mm-hmm. And that builds on our pedigree of understanding cash and the problems with cash, authentication, recognition, how you store it, how you take it in, how you withdraw it, and making sure that we're the world's number one cash recycling company. And that, I think, comes to light every time a bank asks for these solutions, that hopefully they come and speak with us first. Mm-hmm. And we're happy to take on the challenges. What we're seeing is that banks are doing things in different ways, and they're taking some of our solutions and then asking us to adapt them and develop them. And Indonesia's definitely been doing that for the last 5, 6, 10 years, mm-hmm. To cater for the challenges in the environment. So Indonesia is unique in so many ways, not just because it has great food, but because we have huge amounts of cash still going in and out of branches, more cash in circulation than ever before. And we have more people joining the economy. And so that means that we were in a convenience store earlier this week and bewildered at the number of ways in which you can pay. And yet, as I counted the transactions, still 8 out of 10 of the transactions that I watched were still with cash. And they were still looking at ways of, okay, how do we manage that better? And so that's where we bring our insights and try and understand what's happening with a convenience store and say, okay, how does that tie in with the bank branch, and are there similar solutions, and keep thinking for the next generation of devices.
I want to kind of switch the focus on, when these banks come to you, acknowledging that Glory is such a big mm-hmm. player. Well, maybe if we flip the situation, when you guys try and approach a bank, what type of challenges do they usually, propose? Like, for example, maybe security concerns, or maybe integration challenges with their existing systems, resistance to change from their staff or customers, or maybe even budget limitations?
So I think we had it described to us very, very well this week in one of our meetings, where the bank said their biggest challenge right now was branch profitability.
Okay.
And this was very much from the branch team, and it covers a lot of different members from around the bank, but saying we have this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So how do we make it pay for itself? How do we make sure that it's delivering rather than investing all that money in digital infrastructure? Yeah. Sure, got to carry on having the app and the website and digital ways of engaging, but how do we ensure that the branches themselves are profitable? Yeah. Part of that comes down to people, size, infrastructure in the branch, how you're automating transactions. So wanting the good transactions that you can manage and turn from a non-customer to a customer, but also making sure that customers can maybe do more of the transactions themselves, be that on the app. So I think profitability is the number one. Beyond that, security is almost taken as read. Where there's money, there's need to an understanding of making sure that it's managed properly. Staff retention, staff hiring. I think nobody really jumps out of bed in the morning and is super excited to be counting money all day. Yeah. And so if you are able to take away the stress and the hassle of that and give people time for people, mm-hmm. and making sure that start of day process, that end of day process is as simple as a few clicks on a computer, that the branch manager, that the district supervisor, that the head of branches back can all see mm-hmm. that data instantly, then that transparency and that understanding of risk mm-hmm. is becoming more and more important. So each bank that we work with, and certainly this week has proven it again, have a unique blend of issues that they're dealing with, mm-hmm. often from the same group of issues: security, risk, oversight from regulators, yeah. profitability, revenue growth, transition in terms of whether they are expanding, consolidating, taking on maybe new client base, thinking about maybe they've acquired assets from another organization, or maybe just a portfolio of assets from another organization. How do we then drive the engagement to get the very best out of that? And we're finding that digital transformation, branch transformation are being used as the vehicle for a lot of that change.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you, Ben. You know how we look towards the past. Now I kind of want to focus on the future. Mm-hmm. So what do you predict for the future of branch automation and digital transformation in the Indonesian banking and financial industry? Let's say for the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So we have with so many branches this week, and I have seen that there's still so many process mm-hmm. That could be improved, could be automated. So just like the tellers counter, the tellers still taking so many time to do the cash transaction, counting the cash by themselves, sorting the cash by manual. So I believe in the next 5 to 10 years in Indonesia, those kind of cash process will be automated to the machine, like a TCR. Adjust those cash transaction to the TCR machines. So for the bank, from the aspect from the banks, it will take time to see the payback. Yeah, by deploying the TCR machine, mm-hmm. especially for the bank who's mainly use the desktop products like the shoulder, only mm-hmm. the shoulders. From the shoulder to TCR, it will take some time for them to see the payback. But also from the customers, I think the challenge for the bank is to educate the customer, because the consumers in Indonesia, they tend to go to the teller's counter mm-hmm. to ask for tellers for cash transaction rather than doing by themselves. Yeah. Because for the consumer, it has benefits because they don't have to wait until the consumer before the customer in front of him to be served by the tellers. And also, this kind of cash transaction could be done probably 24 hours in 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. How about you, Ben? What do you predict?
So there's a quote by a very famous physicist. I think it was Niels Bohr, who I think won a Nobel Prize. And he said something along the lines of, the problem with predicting the future is it's very unstable, or it's very, very difficult. Yeah. And we'll have to work out what the actual quote is, but this is the problem with prediction of the future is it's really difficult to do. However, based on the past is a very good benchmark for what could come. What's been really interesting this week is that I haven't heard a single bank tell me that they want their bank branches to look like Apple stores, which maybe 4 or 5 years ago was everybody was thinking that they were going to have coffee shops in branches, that their branches were going to really resemble some sort of technology store. I haven't heard a single bank say that. And that's so refreshing because I don't think that's what people really want. And so I think the idea of that in the future, there will be branches, but they're probably more likely to be advisory centers where people go to for financial education, for planning conversations, whether that's about education planning, retirement planning, family planning, thinking about their investments that they want to make. It may be regulatory in terms of making sure they can sign up for different products and solutions for themselves. So I think we'll maybe see different looks and feel, smaller maybe in different places, depending on where people go. We've seen more and more financial services go to shopping centers, for example, where people are spending their weekends and the hours of operation are changing. I think we'll see a seamless mix. And of course, this is all the things that Sue and I have said are really our opinions rather than Glory's opinions. But I think we'll see technology blend more seamlessly. So you'll probably see people being able to bring devices into stores and interact with other machines. I think we'll see QR codes continue to grow as how people transact. But there's still this big, where the physical meets the digital. And there's lots of consultants talk about the phygital area, or I think we're going to see that continue to play a part where you can have lots of online transactions, but there's still going to be that part of the economy that is still operating in real life or physically, and that the branches themselves may end up being, to some degree, very transactional hubs, whether that's for SMEs, for retailers who are still going to require. And very recently, there was a huge technology outage. And of course, all around the world, whether you were in Australia or you were in the US or everywhere in between, you had stores, retailers, banks going down. And if you live in a purely digital world, then how are you transacting? Exactly. And so there's been very much this element in the press since that incident of people talking about, I need to have that backup system. Now, it may be that cash is relegated to the second type of payment that people have, but I still think it's going to be very important as a backup. And as we become more reliant on technology, so, when I leave today, I'm going to be booking a taxi on an app. I'm going to be checking in on my phone. I'm going to be ordering my groceries for home on my phone. I'm going to be ordering some books and very much, communicating digitally. But if that goes down, there's still an element of making sure that we can plan and manage around that. So I think we're going to see a continuity of what we have today in terms of how branches are continuing down this path of more a space for people, no more trying to get rid of queues, making it comfortable, where you can go, where you can engage, where you can get advice, and where the technology is seamlessly integrated and helping people. So you almost feel it's not there, and that the bank staff themselves, whatever they're going to be called, are going to help you complete your transactions or get done what you need to get done. And what's been great this week is seeing Indonesian banks saying to us, we're on that path and we recognize we have a long journey to go. And as a country approaching 300 million people, with an economy that continues to grow, there's a recognition that we need to bring the population with us while still catering for all those different areas around geography. Clearly, Jakarta isn't Indonesia. And even in Jakarta, you have very different areas of where things are going on. And so you need to make sure that it's encompassing and delivering on all the promises that the government says, this is how we're going to be inclusive and what comes next. And so I think it's going to be an exciting time. And I think there's going to be lots of opportunity for experimentation, for the banks to try different things. And I'm sure some of the things that are going to be happening in branches probably haven't even been invented yet. So let's wait and see.
Let's wait and see. So before we close here, maybe the last question that I could direct to both of you are, what are maybe some advice or some key success factors that you can give to banks maybe watching our podcast today on maybe if they're potentially thinking about branch automation and digital transformation?
Yes, I think all the things that all the branch automations, all the things that bank is going to do is all about the enhanced customer experience, and which lead to generating profit for the bank at the end. So I think the key success is listen to the consumers and to see how the customer want to interact with the bank and how do they want to use the branch. And do they want to use the branch for cash transaction only, or do they want to use as a customer service centers? Yes, so I think also in other countries, the consumers they prefer to go to the branch for some advice on loans, on financial advisement or something like that. So the key factor probably for the bank is to focus on how the their customer want to integrate with the bank, with the to do in the branches. Yeah.
Awesome. How about you, Ben? What is some advice that you would give?
So, it's a really good question. I would never give a bank advice, right, as a starter, because I think the banks have a very good understanding of where they're going. I think a lot of what Sue said is very true in the sense that by putting your customers at the heart of what you're doing, understanding your customer, and you have different types of customers. And I think the banks are very clear on the segments where they operate and where they operate well. So understanding those segments, understanding those customers' needs and their changing needs is going to be a great place to start. But equally within the banks, we've met some incredibly smart people this last week and many, many other times before. And so listening to the voices within the bank itself, and clearly there are many stakeholders in the industry. I think having wider industry conversations are useful to listen to all your stakeholders, but then widen the net. I'd love for us to be involved in that somehow, some way, sitting around over coffee like this, talking with people like the amazing team at PT Murni to go, okay, well, what are you seeing, whether it's in Paraguay or Colombia or Tennessee or Hong Kong, wherever that is, bring in those insights. And then be bold. Don't be afraid to experiment. The future favors the bold and the brave. This is an amazing country with a huge future ahead of it and continuing to grow on this great history and past and success. And I think there's a confidence that I'm seeing in the Indonesian financial sector that says, we will take the lead. I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was more looking overseas for guidance and so on, like I said about the Apple stores, and we're going to follow, not lead. And when you look at some of what the banks in Indonesia are doing and how we're having those conversations, we're seeing a lot of leadership coming out and saying, we know what's right for Indonesia, and we're not afraid to do that. And I think that are on the right path to continue having those conversations. And we look really forward to being part of that and working out where we will be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time. What we won't be is in spacesuits and flying taxis and things like that. I think the future is going to be more of today and the same, but incremental change. So it's going to be evolution, not revolution.
Yeah. Hopefully incremental improvement.
I'm sure there's going to be lots of incremental improvement. You only have to look at what's happened in the last couple of years and how the appification and the digitization is still having an impact today, that we're just getting more and more benefits from that. So
Awesome.
That's where we'll be.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us here.
You're very welcome.
Ben, Sue.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully our audience gets a little bit of a better idea when it comes to branch automation and digital transformation. And we've been here with Glory Global Solutions. Follow us next time on Winnie Talks, where we get you the insights that set you right.